Hi, everybody. Excuse me, Cliff DeWitt here. Um, Sorry about the way the voice sounds. I've been under the weather extremely lately. But anyway, I thought I'd give you a recording. I promised a recording here to preview the final, and that's what we'll do. Okay, if you can see this, hopefully, the final, March 22nd, this Friday, there's 50 questions. We are covering chapters 1 through 12 and 15. There's 50 questions, all multiple choice on the test. Now, chapters 1 through 8, which, as you may remember, was the material we studied and took the midterm over. Those chapters 1 through 8 have 3 questions per chapter to them. So, and they're in order. So then, questions 1, 2, and 3 are in chapter 1. Then questions 2, 3, and 4 are in chapter 2. 4, 5, and 6 are in chapter 3, etc. Okay? That takes you up to question number 24, which would be on chapter 8. But then question 25 is in class, it was about a subject we talked about in class, and that is externalities and market failures. So that question is about that. I had to put that one in there to make it all, excuse me, balance out. So now that brings us to question 26. Questions 26 through 50 cover chapters 9 through 12 and 15. So that means that there are 5 questions per chapter. And again, the chapters are covered in order. So question 26 through 30 will be on chapter 9. And then the next 5 questions about chapter 10, 11, 12, and the last 5 questions are about chapter 15. Okay. Now, if you're taking the test online on Canvas, there's a couple things you need to be reminded of. First of all, that you have 2 hours, 120 minutes to do the test. And if you don't do the test in 2 hours, at 2 hours, as much as you've done is 2 hours, that's your total that you've completed for the test. Okay, 2 hours. The time available online is from midnight a.m. Friday to 11:59 p.m. In other words, you need to do your test within those time frames. If, for instance, you have to work late and you come in late and you come in at 11:30 and you realize you have to do your test, well, you have 30 minutes to do your test before it disappears. Okay? You can do your test at one sitting. You have to. Okay, if you get out of the test that you've done to eat lunch or something, come back, get it, you can't do it. It will lock you out, and that's your score. And there's not anything I can do to reopen this test once it's done. Okay, now that is one possibility or one alternative. The other one is that you can come to the library Friday afternoon at 1, Friday afternoon at 1 or later, and take the paper test, take a hard copy test. Now, what I want you to do is, if you want to do this, please email me that you're going to, so I know how many to have printed. Now, the advantage of this is that I'm not quite so picky about, you know, the 120 minutes thing, okay? The library closes at 4, and so we can't go any farther than that. But the library closes at 4. And I want to keep it somewhere around 2 hours, but I'm not, you know, terribly picky on that, okay? So, let's go into some of the strategies of the thing. Some of the things maybe you should look for. I would say the first chapter has to deal with definitions, but applications of definitions. So, if something exists, or because of something, something else has to be done, okay? For instance, opportunity costs have to be considered. Why? Because of scarcity. There's limited resources, okay? The chapter 2 is about elements of production, factors of production, and the production possibilities curve. Review that. Review that the production possibilities curve. That is one type of stuff that's outputted, and that's another. Curve is like that. Anything in the curve is not efficient. Unemployment, that sort of thing. Anything on the curve is efficient, but a movement from one point to the other, or one output to the other, increasingly, as you move from one to the other, you get less additions of B for more sacrificing of A, you might say, okay? And this talks about opportunity costs. Anything out here we can't get without economic growth. Economic growth is the outward movement of the curve, and this tells us also about comparative advantage, which is something we'll learn about later. Or I mean, which is something we will be tested about, particularly in the chapter 15 type things. Chapter 3, micro supply and demand. Notice the difference between a movement of a curve and a movement along a curve, okay? If that is price and quantity, and that's demand, okay? As long as we're talking about price and quantity, the curve doesn't move. If it's something other than price and quantity, the curve moves, okay? And if you're asked to see what the difference in the supply curve is like that, if these curves move around, discern what direction they're moving, and then compare equilibrium point 1 maybe with equilibrium point 2 and see how they differ, okay? So that is chapter 3. Chapter 4 are things dealing with applications of supply and demand. Remember about what happens when there are price ceilings and price floors. Okay. Chapter 5. What equilibrium does. And there's also check out market failure and external costs, what deals with them, or what some of the implications of those things are. Okay, chapter 5 is where we get to talk about GDP, what the definition of it is, what it's made up of. We talk, I believe, in that chapter about price indexes, and there will be a problem where you have to calculate the value of something in real terms as opposed to nominal terms. Okay. Chapter 6 deals, I believe, with aggregate demand. Notice the difference here. When the aggregate demand curve, it may look like the micro curve, but it's not. We got a price index here. And we have a lousy marker there too, and we have another one there. Okay, price index, and then GDP. Okay, aggregate demand goes down. Okay, it's not for the same reason. Not for the same reason. Now, if GDP goes up because the price level goes down, it's a movement along a curve, just like the micro curve. But if it's something other than the price index, then the curve will move around. Okay. Let's see what else we got. How much time we have here? 11 minutes. Let's see. Chapter 6 talks a little bit about elasticities and inferior goods, which are goods that the demand will increase if the income level goes down. Okay, but there will be 3 questions on chapter 6, and they have to deal with applications of the supply and demand and things like that. It's chapter 7. Chapter 7, we learned about gaps in GDP. We learned about gaps in terms of inflationary or recessionary and what the government will do to rectify them. Now we're running out of time, and I'm still quite ill, so I don't want to fall over on camera. Look at a couple things. Know what the multipliers are. Okay. The bank multiplier is 1 over the required reserve ratio. Okay. So if you put $1,000 in a bank, okay, if that required reserve ratio, say you put $1,000 in the bank, 1 over 0.10 equals 10, so that $1,000 put in the bank will eventually make $10,000 addition to the money supply. Okay. So banking, the Fed, study the Fed, study monetary and fiscal policy, and see the differences and the ways in which they work and which they don't work. Excuse me. Notice the bond market. Really pay attention to that. What is a bond? And why is the bond market so influential on the entire economy? Okay. What else can we do? Look at international trade. Look at fiscal policy. Look at the gaps of fiscal policy, or the lags, I should say. Fiscal policy tries to treat the economy by injecting money into the system. But the problem is with fiscal policy, the lag times are even worse than monetary policies because of the political process, and everybody tries to prevent their political opponents from looking good. Okay. And then, of course, the last 5 questions are international trade. Look that over. Look over at the current accounts and, the different managements of currency exchange rates. There's different ones. You'll be asked about that. So good luck on it. Just think about it and you will do well. Thanks.